for 10 years from now, which is the best thing to do. Financially,
Alright.
biggest goals to make
Is there a
sure
Wi-Fi
kids are
password
ready for college.
to that printer, or is it just reading
So,
I even pulled up the themselves.
oh no.
Okay.
I always sent them to Ranger and we can't afford to pay for college.
That was your investment.
It I don't know, whatever.
Everyone ready?
Sure.
We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and the study session, and the first topic is the presentation on the city's strategic plan, capital improvement program, and budget process. So Danielle Bushcutter with our city manager's office is here to give you all an overview of the process.
Thank you guys for having me. Like Dave said, I am Danielle Bushcutter. I'm the Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. And I'm going to kind of go over briefly our strategic plan as well as our 2019 budget, and then kind of give you an overview of what you guys can kind of expect as it relates to the 2020 budget process, which is officially underway. All right, so we will get started with just some kind of overarching information about our strategic plan. So this is a plan that outlines a systematic process for moving towards a vision in a manner that involves the development and prioritization of strategic goals along with measurable strategies and objectives. So what this really means is we put together a plan that outlines over the next couple years big goals that we're moving towards, and we've identified a number of performance metrics or indicators to help us measure success within those goals. And then we've also identified some specific projects that we hope to achieve over the duration of the strategic plan, which for us is about a 2 to 3 year process. And the reason that I kind of wanted to go over the strategic plan before we really get into the budget stuff is because this is really what helps guide our budget process. If you look at the memos that go to the City Commission, you'll notice in there that we try to identify things that go before the Commission, how it relates to these different kind of goal areas within our strategic plan. So this is really kind of the driving document that we follow as we kind of make budgetary and strategic decisions. All right, so how was this plan actually developed? So the City Commission really started talking about putting together a strategic plan in 2016 when they were going through the hiring process for a city manager. So at that point, that's when Tom Marcus was hired, and that's really when the discussion about what does a strategic plan look like and how do we want to use that, that's when it really started at the commission level. So after we got a city manager in place and we knew that that was something that we wanted to accomplish, we went out and selected a consultant to help kind of facilitate us through the process. So prior to this strategic plan being adopted, we had some goal areas, we had some kind of key metrics, but we didn't have really a strategic plan document. So this was really to help us kind of move towards actually having a document in place to kind of identify these goals. So a consultant was selected and we went through that process. And in March of 2017, our strategic plan was adopted. This updated our mission, vision, and values, which I'll go through in just a minute. And it also identified 7 critical success factors, which are those big goal buckets, if you will. And then 8 priority initiatives. So these are those key projects that I talked about wanting to accomplish in the 2 to 3 year time span that this plan is in place. And I'm actually going to hand out, just so you guys have the full plan. If you want to just pass one around. this is the actual document that we ended up with. I kind of gave a summary here, and I'll walk through it, but I wanted to make sure that you guys actually saw the document, because there's some additional definitions and things like that in there. So the mission that we came up with was, we are committed to providing excellent city services that enhance the quality of life for the Lawrence community. The vision statement was the City of Lawrence supporting an unmistakably vibrant community with innovative, equitable, transparent, and responsible local government. And our organizational values were character, competence, courage, collaboration, and commitment. So this was a bit of an update from what our mission, vision, and values were prior to this, although the intent behind it, I think, stayed the same, but we kind of gave it a bit of a update and a facelift. All right, so now I'm going to walk through the critical success factors. So these are, you can kind of think of these as kind of the key goal areas within our strategic plan. And as we were going through this process, these are the things that have to go right in order for us as a community to be successful, is how we really kind of articulated the purpose of these factors. So hopefully these are things that will stay relatively consistent year over year, even though we will make updates to the strategic plan every couple of years. So the 7 critical success factors that we arrived on were effective governance and professional administration, safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods, innovative infrastructure and asset management, commitment to core services, sound fiscal stewardship, collaborative solutions, and economic growth and security. So each of these has a definition. You can look at it in the handout that I sent around. I'm not going to read it to you, but those are the things that have to go right in order for us to be successful. And these are the things that we have identified a number of performance metrics related to these different critical success factors. All right, now we will get into the priority initiatives. So these are the things that will likely change when we update the strategic plan every few years. So these are really the 2 to 3 year projects or tangible items that we want to come out of the strategic plan. So in this first strategic plan, there were 8 of these priority initiatives that were identified. The first was to evaluate and inventory our existing advisory boards, and make recommendations to either consolidate where appropriate, dissolve where appropriate, or enhance. We enhance some of the policies surrounding advisory boards so that they were more consistent across the entire city. So we made sure that advisory boards had bylaws, and there's a policy that kind of governs how we look at advisory boards and those sorts of things. So that was really an effort by the commission to help kind of streamline our advisory boards and commissions. The next really related to professional development. And so this was an effort to improve the professional development opportunities that staff had access to. The next one was reducing or minimizing the barriers to high-speed fiber, completion of East 9th Street, which I'm happy to report. As it relates to the strategic plan, this was the first thing we were actually able to check off the list and say it was completed. The street isn't complete, but we are getting very close to that. A facilities master plan, a priority-based budgeting, a long-term financial strategy, and a downtown master plan. So we are in various stages of progress on each of these. And these have been things that have been in the works since, some of them way before the strategic plan was adopted, but others we really started focusing on once the strategic plan was approved. Does anyone have any questions on any of those? I'm happy to, yeah.
I'm trying to compare the initiatives to the success factors.
Mm-hmm.
Is the intent that the initiative somehow or other will be able to check off with the success factors?
Each one of them is kind of housed within one of the critical success factors.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, yes. There isn't one initiative for each critical success factor, however.
Right.
So there are a couple that I think have, I think one of them has 3 and a couple have 1 or 2 and a few of them don't have any. But yes, each one associates to
So,
one of them.
so for the critical success factor, safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods, what priority initiatives would fall into that?
That is one of them that doesn't currently have any. And some of these, I think, in a lot of ways could fit under multiple, but we had to house it under one specific critical success factor. So that one is one of them that doesn't have any.
Well, in my experience, which isn't all that great, but when I have experienced strategic plans, there are some areas that are neglected and kind of fall off the list, and that's one that I think is very weak and we need to keep an eye on.
Mhm.
You did say there were performance measures
Yes.
associated with each critical success factor.
Yes.
Can you maybe talk about the performance measures under safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods?
Sure. And if you want, I can actually pull up our strategic planning website, which has all of them. But some of them include a lot of our planning and development services metrics that we track. Some of them include a number of our kind of parks and recreation related activities. I think those are kind of the two, if I had to put them into kind of big buckets, those are the big buckets. And one of the things that doesn't show up on this, but is kind of housed within that, is all of our discussions related to affordable housing. So even though there are some things that aren't necessarily an identified initiative, there's still kind of key priorities that I think the commission has really identified and we're moving forward and making progress on.
I think that's helpful to know. It sounds like there's a set of items that are critical to be maintained and monitored over time. And then in some cases, there might be an initiative that kind of gets to how do we make some major change in an area?
Yeah,
And this
I think
seems
that's fair.
kind of fairly standard.
Well, in terms of the Transportation Commission, I think what is that called again? The Safe, Healthy, and Welcoming Neighborhoods, the Transportation Commission should address that.
I would be curious about the measures that are related to what we think of as our kind of area, how that, across all the 7 success factors.
And I would say,
Yeah.
I would imagine a lot of them related to this particular commission are also under the innovative infrastructure and asset management, because that's where we talk about things like PCI and some of our kind of ongoing maintenance programs as it relates to our road system and our transit system. So I think a lot of them that relate to this board also fall under that particular category. So this is, yeah,
Could you talk about collaborative solutions?
sure.
Just, what does that mean and how does it in practice?
Yeah, so Collaborative Solutions really gets at us identifying some key partners in the community and ways that we might be able to enhance service delivery by partnering with another agency. So there are a number of services that the city provides, but there may be other entities in the community that also provide that service. So it's really trying to get at ways that we can identify those partners and work with them kind of strategically on some of those key programs that we identify.
Example would be?
There are a number of them. I'm thinking the county is probably one of the biggest partners. You'll hear from Bob. KU is another huge partner as it relates to our transit service. So I think those are some of the 2 really big partners that we talk about quite a bit. I know in that one we also talk a little bit about, we have a sponsorship policy with our Parks and Recreation Department. And so what are some ways that we can partner with some of those entities in our community who maybe want to sponsor an event or things like that. So it tries to get at that as well. Any other kind of questions? Okay. I just pulled up our strategic plan page really quick. I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you guys. But if you are interested, if you scroll down here to the bottom, you'll see kind of this big, I don't know, it outlines, it's our dashboard that kind of outlines the different metrics that we have. So we'll look at safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods. And if you click on that, you can scroll through and see the different metrics that we're currently measuring. I say this with a caveat because we're moving to a new system and this will likely be down in the next few months, but it is here and we'll continue to track these types of metrics as it relates to this particular metric and all of the others. So as you can see, a lot of parks and recreation, bike paths, those sorts of measures.
Are there benchmarks or performance targets for any of these?
We have not at this point identified benchmarks. I think that's kind of a long-term goal that hopefully we'll start to move towards. Currently, we have over 150 measures and metrics in here, so I think part of it comes with possibly reducing the number of metrics so that we can have more of a key performance indicators instead of a wide number of indicators. So I would look for that to come in the future, but we don't currently have them. So, like I said, this will be changing shortly, but if you want to look at any of those, it is available on our website.
Do you have any measures related to the priority initiatives?
We do not have measures, but what we have done with those, and I'll pick on the advisory boards. We have developed kind of an action plan related to each of those priority initiatives to say, these are the 5, 10, 15 things that we want done in order for us to kind of check that off and say it's completed. So that is what we have done on the priority initiative side. So this one you can look and it has a little bit of everything on it. Everything that's in blue is something that we have completed. Everything in green are things that we're currently working on but are on progress and are moving according to the timeline we've identified. And then we have some things in purple that are upcoming and we will be getting to in the future. So this is how we kind of broke out those two different sides of the strategic plan. All right, any other questions on that piece of it? Okay, great. All right, so like I said, this plan was adopted in March of 2017. We go before the City Commission and give them an update on it every 4 months. We did do kind of a brief look at it at the end of 2017, and we will reevaluate it again in 2019 or early 2020. So the idea is that we will reevaluate our strategic plan after every local election in the event that there are new commissioners that have new ideas and want to bring forward some new priorities. So that's kind of the time frame and timeline that we're on as it relates to updating of the strategic plan. And like I said, I think the idea when we did this is that hopefully those critical success factors will stay relatively similar year over year. Hopefully those aren't changing drastically, but those priority initiatives will definitely be the place that I think we'll see the most change as it relates to this. All right, so any other strategic plan questions? If not, I'll just kind of jump into the budget side of it.
Are there other advisory boards that are trying to attend to kind of connecting to the strategic plan?
I think that's been a major push kind of overall. I know I help with a couple other advisory boards, and we kind of do something similar where we say, all right, this is the direction, generally speaking, that the commission has given for us as staff and for us as a community. So I do think it's something that other advisory boards are aware of, and at least I hope it's in front of them every now and again. And we do have it posted throughout City Hall and other facilities, so it's something we definitely try to keep kind of at the forefront. All right, we'll get into budget then. All right, so a couple kind of key elements to start with. Our fiscal year aligns with our calendar year. We have to, well, we don't have to, but we do adopt our budget annually. So some communities do more of a biennial budget, so they do a 2-year budget. But we have an annual budget process. And the budget by state law must be adopted by August 25th. So those are kind of just some key overviews. Because our 2020 budget process is just beginning, I thought I would kind of present to you what our 2019 adopted budget looks like, just to give some kind of context to what you can expect in the 2020 budget process. So total expenditures were just over $206 million, and that's across all funds. The general fund is structurally balanced, which means revenues equal expenditures, and then all of the other funds are balanced within a 5-year financial forecast. So we do have a couple reserve funds that from one year or another, revenues may exceed expenditures or vice versa, depending on what the needs of the community are, depending on what the fund balance is, and a number of other factors. The current mill levy is 33.278 mills, and our budget included a 5-year capital improvement plan. So to give you a bit of an idea as to where the city revenues come from, this is kind of the breakdown between the entire city budget. So about half of it, 45%, come from taxes. So these are sales taxes, property taxes. About 40% comes from charges for service. So these are really our utility type funds. So it's the solid waste, paying for your trash bill and your water bill and parks and recreation programs and those sorts of things, services that you pay for the specific service. You can see after that it really kind of drops off. The next biggest category is intergovernmental. So these are grants that we receive from the state or the federal government. So those are taxes and charges for service are really our two big kind of revenue streams for the city. And depending on what fund you look at, the breakdown between those two categories does vary quite a bit. This is a chart that we show pretty much every year, and it is helps to articulate when you pay $1 of your property taxes down at the courthouse. This is where that $1 goes. So 1 cent of it, or 1%, goes to the state of Kansas. 41% goes to the school district, regardless of which school district you're in. 34% goes to Douglas County, and then the remaining 24% comes to the city. All right, so now we'll get into the expenditure side of it. A majority of our budget is people and personnel and the costs related to having people work for the city. The next largest category are contractual services. So these are things like professional services. So we may hire an additional engineering firm to help with some engineering plans, or some additional legal services for a specific project or program, or the utility rates that we have to pay. So that's the next biggest category. And then from there, it kind of tapers down a little bit. Commodities, those are things, those are supplies, that's stuff that we're buying. Capital outlay are more of the facility improvements and facility maintenance and those sorts of things. And then debt service is the other big category. So those are things that we have financed over a long period of time that we are paying back a certain amount every year for those projects. So a lot of our major capital projects that you will see in the community are funded with debt. So we have an annual debt service payment that we have to make. Is that kind of?
Are those, this pie chart, does it stay pretty stable year to year?
I would say, generally speaking, yes. Personnel continues to grow every year, so that takes up a bigger portion of the pie. but I would say by and large, it stays pretty consistent year over year. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit about kind of the CIP side, because that's really one of the things that this advisory board is tasked with being a part of. So our capital improvement plan helps us plan long-term for our capital needs in the community. There are a couple criteria that the project must meet in order for it to be in our capital improvement plan. So the first is that it costs $100,000 or more. And the second is that it has a life expectancy of 2 years or more. So these are really our big major projects that we have. So just for some context, our 2019 to 2023 CIP was $275 million, and the unfunded requests were $80 million. So that's a lot of capital needs that have been identified over the course of the next 5 years.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
What kind of projects would have a life expectancy closer to 2 years? Because in my mind, I'm thinking roads, sewer pipes. What has such a short life expectancy? Seems like a low bar to reach.
Yeah, part of it is we have some projects in here that are more maintenance related. So it may be patching this or that. It may be some short-term fix out at one of the playgrounds.
Okay.
So I would say most of the things that are in here far exceed that 2-year life, useful life, but that is the minimum that we state.
And also,
Yeah.
if you're going to go into this, feel free to stop me, but I'm curious, what is represented in the unfunded CIP total? Is that stuff that is kind of like it can be put off because you can maintain it at a slightly longer interval than you would normally have to, or what does that look like?
Part of it has a lot of things. There are some really large projects in there. So there's a couple different facilities that are millions and millions of dollars that did not fit in the 5-year cost projection. So part of it is what can we fit in the 5 years? And so I think one of the things that was in there was another fire station. That is a major, major capital project, in addition to the people that have to be added if that moves forward. So I think that was out in 2023, but it's some of those things that are forecasting major facility needs that the community has.
Okay.
And some of them are things that we just can't afford. Some
That's
of them
what I was
are, we have X number of dollars and we can only afford these 7 projects, even though we really would like to do all 10.
So
So it's a little bit of
I
both.
guess as a corollary then, how long has CIP been a thing? And if so, have you seen that proportion change over the years?
We started doing this kind of in this format, I think in 2016. I'm looking at you guys. So it hasn't been around for very long. So I think with something like this, it continues to evolve every year a little bit. I think that number has gone up from the 2018 budget by quite a bit. And I think part of it is we're actually trying to identify the needs that we have. I think before we had an idea of how much money we had to spend, so as staff, we said, all right, these are the priorities, let's align those the best we can. Whereas I think with this 19 to 2023 CIP, it was a lot more, let's step back and identify all of the needs, and then we'll go through that prioritization process. So I don't anticipate that number going down a whole lot, especially as we talk about our facility master plan and identifying what we want our facilities to look like, because anytime you talk about a new facility, you're talking about a pretty significant dollar amount, or even rehab to existing facilities.
Okay,
Are there any other questions kind of on this piece of it? This is something that's evolved quite a bit over the last few years, and I'm sure will continue to evolve. Okay. And one of the other things that I wanted to kind of talk about as it relates to this, there are kind of 2 different buckets that most things that fall in the CIP fall into. One of them are very specific projects. So this is things like the study and design for the downtown portion of the Lawrence Loop. Some of the other things are the Castle project that's happening. It wasn't in this CIP, it was in a prior year, but some of them are those very specific projects. And then there are other things that are more program buckets. So we've set aside a certain dollar amount for different programs. So it might be a water line replacement program, it might be something like the bike ped ADA dollars, or the, what's the other one I'm thinking of? The traffic calming program that's more programmatic in nature and not necessarily we've identified one specific project. And those are the things that you tend to see year after year. So I think that's important to kind of recognize too as you look at the CIP. You'll notice some things in there again and again and again, and that's probably because it's a lot more programmatic in nature than it is a one-time project. And I know one of the things that you all are tasked with is providing funding recommendations for some of these capital projects and programs to the City Commission. So I think that's something that's kind of important to keep in mind as you're looking at these things. All right, so I will briefly go over the budget process for 2020. As staff, we started this back in the end of January, beginning of February, but the public side really kicks off in May. So May 14th is when the 2020 through 2024 recommended CIP will be presented to the City Commission. That CIP will also go before the Planning Commission, and then in June, we will have the city manager's recommended operating budget, and there's usually some revisions to the CIP that we bring back at that point as well. Then in July, we come back again when we have some updated revenue projections that we receive from the county. Later in July, we set the maximum expenditure limit, and that's something that we have to do by law before we have the public hearing and ultimately the budget adoption. So this is kind of the public side of the 2020 budget process and what you can kind of expect to see.
Can you explain a little more about, you said the CIP is presented to the Planning Commission as well?
Yes, and
Is that a standard practice?
it is. So what they do is they make sure that our CIP aligns with the comprehensive plan that the city has to make sure that, you know, this arm of the city is saying, hey, we should build this road over here, but that doesn't align with the comprehensive plan. So they're really just doing kind of a cursory overview to make sure that the projects align with the comp plan that we have in place.
Has that date been set, or is that?
I think it is May 22nd. I think it's been tentatively scheduled. I'm not sure that's been finalized yet, but. Are there other questions? There's a lot of kind of public touch points as it relates to the budget, all doing slightly different things. No? All right. I did have a slide in here for some of that additional information. So we looked at the strategic plan site. So I would encourage you to kind of click through that. I think there's some good information there, and you can look at those metrics in a little bit more detail, and you can look at those action plans as well if you're interested. And then I also put a link to our current budget webpage and then the CIP page as well, which is where we'll keep all of the information as we're going through this budget process. All right, well, with that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you guys have. I also put my email on here in case you have any additional questions. I'm happy to answer those. This is a lot to try to cover in a relatively short amount of time, so it was a very high-level overview. Yeah.
So at the risk of, I don't know, I feel like we should probably do a time check. Bob, how long do you expect your presentation to go? Because I don't want to. I mean, I've probably heard all of it before, but for everybody else.
It's going to be very short.
Okay, well, in that case, how is the priority-based budgeting consultancy going so far? And do you expect that to change any of the strategic plan or CIP elements that you talked about?
So we are, and I can pull it up as well. We're kind of in the middle of that.
Okay.
So, as staff, we went through a process where we identified all of the different programs that we have in place. And we really told departments, don't worry about where the funding comes from. Just step back and look at your operation and tell us what programs and services you provide. So that was really kind of step one of the priority-based budgeting. Step two then was to bring the cost back into the equation and say, okay, now that we've identified all of the programs that we have, let's assign a cost to that program. From there, we went through a prioritization process. So based on the strategic plan, we came up with a matrix and we scored every program against that matrix to come up with kind of a list from A to Z, what programs we had and how that aligned with the strategic plan. So what we have done, the next phase of that is really kind of the analysis phase. So different cities use priority-based budgeting in different ways. Some communities use it just for, let's reframe how we talk about budget. Let's talk about the budget in terms of the services and the programs we provide, instead of talking about it based on the departments we have or based on the different funds that we have. Trying to kind of slice the budget in a different way. And some communities, that's the sole purpose of having priority-based budgeting. Other communities try to take that a step further and say, all right, now that we've gone through this process, we've prioritized things, let's talk about if we want to reallocate resources. Those resources being people's time or the actual tangible resources that we have. So that's how other communities use it. Some communities take that then one step further and say, let's look at this as an entire community. Let's look at, going back to the collaboration, let's look at what other organizations in our community do that align with what we're currently doing and see if we can't have a partnership that maybe releases or relieves some of the burden on one of those two entities. So I'm not quite sure out of that scope where we are going to fall. What we've done to this point is we have opened up kind of our results on the city's webpage, and we've kind of gone through a training on how to use that. So we did that March 19th, and then coming up in April, at the April 9th meeting, that's when we'll start to have the discussion on the results. And that's where we'll show, all right, we have 270 programs. They fall into these 4 quartiles. What direction does the commission want to give? What direction do they want to send staff in as we're going into the 2020 budget process? And what that looks like is yet to be determined, but that's kind of where we're at in that process. So it's really just a different way of talking about the budget and looking at the budget. And I think that next step will really be determined April 9th to a large degree.
If I could, I'm trying to put all of this in the context of what we do. And I've asked I think of all the stuff I saw with the strategic plan and the budget. The one slide that pops out to me is the critical success factors.
Yeah.
In terms of what we do, how we may or may not make decisions, the filters we put, what staff brings to us. I think there's a lot in that one slide. I kind of, I'm interested in kind of the bigger picture, budgeting and all of that, but bringing it into the context of what we do and how we function, I think we really need to think about.
I like that comment. That's
Yeah,
very
and
appropriate.
there's 3 of these that I think Carol pointed out, safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods. Well, that's kind of, a big deal. And maybe the neighborhood traffic management program will allow us to get a little further into that. The other one, innovative infrastructure and asset management. I mean, think about that. That's a big deal in this strategic plan, and that's something that we touch all the time. So what does that mean in terms of, what we do and what we recommend? And the last thing I'll comment on is collaborative solutions. I asked you about that, and, I got kind of a big picture view, but I do tend to think that if you look across the advisory boards in the city, there's opportunities to do that. And I don't think people take advantage of that. I don't think the city takes advantage of how, and we've mentioned several times, the sustainability board. And, I mean, we're kind of in the same loaf of bread with them in terms of what we care about and what we're trying to affect. So think about, you know, what it means to this group and how we use this information.
Right, and I think to a large extent too, another one that relates really directly with this board is that sound fiscal stewardship.
Yeah,
Because you guys are making funding recommendations to the city commission. And as you know, there are always more projects than there are dollars to fund those projects. And I think that's another one that you guys can kind of look at as you go through and have some of those discussions to really focus and kind of hone in on.
well,
Because that's
I'm not
another
sure
big
we
one.
really make funding recommendations, do we?
Not yet.
Yeah,
But we have some work to do, it sounds like. I mean, from last year didn't get done, so,
mhm.
I mean, there's $1 million queued up, so at some point.
Well, yeah, in that context.
On the amount to be funded, but
Right,
on
that's
the,
what
On
on
the
the amount
projects.
that is budgeted,
yeah,
recommendations on how to use those,
Yeah.
yeah.
okay, okay.
That policy, the rubric around the prioritization of those
Mhm.
projects, I mean, that's all
Mhm.
Mhm.
kind of tied to that.
Yeah. I think we should have opportunity for public comment too, if anybody wants to offer that up briefly. Michael?
Thank you. I would just add to your list for services.
Michael,
Transportation.
could you step up to the
service.
mic?
Okay. Thank you, Chuck.
Thanks.
Yeah, Michael Allman. Thanks, Steve, for the opportunity. I would just add to Steve's list of relevant strategic components of the core services, as I think, and I think others would think transportation is a core service. Multimodal transportation, transit, any of those would fall into that category, I think. Beyond that, no, I don't think I have anything to add, but thanks.
All right. Well, we're gonna move on, and Bob's gonna give everyone an update on the Transit Hub project.
That's it. I'm done. For those of you that don't know the process we've been going through with transit and the transit center, we did our first study about 5 years ago. It came up with some answers for us. That didn't pan out. We did another study last year. We presented it to commission. We had two locations that came out of that study. One was our current location at 7th of Vermont, and the second one was at 1941 Stewart, which is between Iowa and Stewart, and 19th and 21st. So it was not well received by commission. Commission at the time asked us to go back and talk to the university about whether they wanted, would reconsider the location at Stewart, which is an endowment property. So it's property that's being used for the betterment of the university, or if there wasn't another location on campus that they would consider. One of the locations that was in both of the studies that we had, the first and the second study, was a location at Bob Billings and Crestline. That is pretty much, it's on the southeast corner of the intersection there, if you can picture that, just across from University Safety and Security, their police department. So we went back to the university and asked them to at least look at that site again. The university sent us a letter in November and said, yes, we would like to have that site as a location instead of the Stewart location. So what that means to us, I guess, is the site at Bob Billings and Crestline is a state-owned property. So where the endowment property is being used for the betterment of the university, state property is state-owned property. We kind of shied away from that in both studies because that's a little bit more difficult to deal with, the state property and how to get use of state property. So the university they're working on a few things right now to try to figure out a way of utilizing that property. What we're going to ask city commission to do is to give us the opportunity to go back and work with the university on developing the actual site. And that is how much land we're actually going to need. Things like access to it, which is going to be really important. It's just east of an intersection of Crestline and Bob Billings, so how do you get in and out of that? Big issue, how we get in and out of that. We're going to have vehicles that are going to be making a left-hand turn across Bob Billings to go westbound or northbound. So that could be a problem for us. So we're going to have to figure all that out. So that's what we're going to go to commission on May the 7th, I think, and ask them for approval to let us go forth and do that. So this is probably as close as we've been to a location. Commission could say no to this too. Who knows what commission will do when they do it. But so we'll just sit back and see what they say, and then we'll go from there. So that is about as short as I can make it. So if you have any questions, feel free to fire away, and it'll just make it a little bit longer.
I could comment on something else that I think is an important point with this particular location. I believe it's the one location of all the ones that were studied with, I think there was 15 in the original study, that the neighborhood itself actually came out in support of it, right? Whereas none of the other neighborhoods supported the bus station in their neighborhood. So it seems like that's a big deal.
Yeah,
Or at least a good
this is the
check.
only location that we've had out of the, and we've looked at probably 100 different locations in the two studies.
Right.
It's boiled down to 7 locations in the first study, 5 in the second one. Some of them were the same locations, but this is the first time that a neighborhood association has said, we'll entertain it here for the betterment of the community. And so that's a big step forward into where we've been. Other locations where we've had people said, NIMBY, almost immediately. So you're right, Nick. This is a big win.
So where does the transportation planning happen for this hub?
The transportation planning, we'll probably have to go back and get a consultant to do some of the work for traffic analysis and that kind of stuff. We'll have to work with the university on what big a piece, where that's going to be, and if it's, I mean, if you can kind of picture the location right now between Crestline and Iowa, the university has a facility that it used to be the maintenance facility for housing. And so it's a long kind of metal building up and down through
So
there.
the plan is that after the consultant through it goes to the city commission?
Yeah, we'd go back to the city commission, and that would be the final decision. You know, it wouldn't, we haven't brought transit issues to the Transportation Commission because we have our own advisory group for that,
What
PTAC.
was that?
We have our own advisory group for that, so we
You
usually
have your own
go to
advisory group for
Public
what?
Transit Advisory Committee before we go to commission for things, right? So what else we have?
Well, if there's no other questions, that's all we have for the study session. So we'll conclude the study session and start the regular meeting at 6 o'clock. Thanks, Bob.
Hello, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started. This is the April 1st, 2019 Transportation Commission, and we haven't had any April Fool jokes yet. Anybody going to come through with anything? We're all chicken, I guess.
Somebody on my Facebook. One of my Facebook friends posted that Castle Drive was completed.
Oh, really?
That seemed a little harsh, but that was his version of an April Fool's joke, so.
Okay.
Clever.
We welcome April Fool jokes if you come up with anything during the meeting. First item on the agenda is the approval for the meeting minutes for last month, March 4th. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve the meeting minutes for March 4th Transportation Commission meeting.
Second.
Charlie made the motion and Nick seconds. All those in favor say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain. I wasn't here.
You abstained, Catherine abstains. Motion passes with one abstinence. Item number 2 is general public comment. We've heard this before. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues that are not scheduled on the regular agenda. Each person or organization will be limited to 3 minutes. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss, debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented at this time. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments to the commission. General public comment is open.
You want to sign in first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we seem to look at this committee.
All right, ready?
Yes?
Well, first of all, I'll say hello, Commission, and I want to thank you for your time tonight and this public comment. First of all, my name's Luke Smith. I'm currently a student at the University of Kansas, and there's nothing I love more than being able to get around efficiently, although I personally have opted to use an electric skateboard, or e-board for short. And these e-boards are made by multiple brands around everywhere, and these boards are not made as toys or even advertised as such. They are far from it. And these boards are manufactured as vehicles for everyday use, and there's many people around the nation, such as in cities such as Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, and New York City, that use these e-boards to get around their cities for faster transportation, essentially similar to the same thing as a bike. Now, when you look at the logistics, e-boards are not different from bikes, yet we allow bikes much more freedom on the roads. E-boards can go up to 20 miles per hour, can go up 20% grade hills, and are equipped with extremely precise brakes for split-second decisions. Individuals riding e-boards are able to hand signal just the same as bikers are, and there are no differences between the two, just besides what the devices are conceptually. Now, this all confuses me when I look at the Lawrence Traffic Ordinance, Section 109.1, which states it shall be unlawful for any person to operate a motorized skateboard on any street, road, or highway in this city. Now, e-boards are essentially outlaws in the city of Lawrence, but I see no reason as Lawrence is already riddled with bikes everywhere, as well as with the whole University of Kansas bike system going on there with bikes everywhere on the roads scattered throughout. Not to mention that cities on much larger scales have adopted e-boards despite their denser concentration of traffic and people. I just propose that Lawrence opt out of Section 109.1 of the STO, which prohibits the use of e-boards, which are no different from bikes. This would have no effect on human push skateboard laws, such as these already have their own separate legislation regarding them. All in all, I would love if my proposal could be distributed and talked about and repped upon, but if you have any questions regarding this matter, I would love to answer them, and I would say thank you so much for your time. You have a great night.
Any questions? How fast can you go on an e-board?
So the one I use is a Booster board. That's the company that I use. And so they make them as with industrial grade materials, and they're made as vehicles. It's not a toy or made or such. And they understand that it's used as everyday transportation for people in their daily commutes. And these go up to 20 to 25 miles an hour. You can go on them. They don't always have to go that fast. They have separate modes you set them on. And so they're controlled by a controller. And essentially you can control your acceleration, you can control how fast you brake, and you can control how fast your torque is. Any of those different things you can use.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, they also go up hills as well, and they have no problem with that. And I think that was just my main point, is that we have all these bikes everywhere, we have these bike systems everywhere, and we allow bikes on the road. We even have bike lanes. But yet when I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, well, my mode of transportation is banned, yet I pose no different of a threat or nuisance, such as a bicycle in the bicycle lane. I'm the same thing. I'm a person on a mode of transportation using the bike lane, going similar speeds as such as a biker, using the same hand signals and doing nothing different. So I was just
Right.
wanting to go off
We
that.
got
That's
it.
the main thing. Right.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
of course. Thank you.
Sure.
Steve, I have a quick question.
Okay.
If anyone wants to contact you about this, how would we do that?
So you want me an email or phone number or address or?
You just asked at the end if anybody wanted to talk, you'd like to talk to them, so can you tell us how we would do that?
So my phone number is 316.
I can
Yeah.
send, Luke reached out to me originally,
Yeah.
email, and I asked him to come to this meeting, so I've got his contact info, I can send that to everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, awesome.
I'll
Thank you.
send your email.
Awesome. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Anybody wants to come to me about it, all right.
This is broadcast on YouTube, so.
Is there any other public comment?
I have a question about that e-bike, or e-board. Can we look at this at some point?
That's what I
Because,
want to do, is get a demo.
yeah, I mean, I think it's, if I think about the pedestrian bicycle issue task force, I think our goal was to make other things feasible truly feasible besides the automobile. And then I had other questions, like, you mentioned e-boards are not allowed on, say, I mean, I assume they're allowed on multi-use paths.
I'm not sure about that. And I don't know if there's anything in the state statutes on motorized skateboards on shared use paths, but there
Or
just is on
bike
public
lanes.
streets.
So I would think that they wouldn't be allowed in bike lanes, but it seems like they should be. I mean, that's something I could never quite get over, is bikes are these quasi-pedestrian vehicle things, because when they're written up by the police department, they're written up as pedestrian accidents, but bicyclists are supposed to follow all the rules of the road, despite being like, 150 pounds for me on a bike, compared to 4,000 or whatever. So I just think it's an interesting question, and one that's really important to address, because I think if students are wanting to use these e-boards, it's one of the issues we've been facing. I would rather see them getting downtown on an e-board than everybody driving their car, if that's the way they wanted to, that's what they wanted to do. So it just seems like it'd be great to address this or look at it more, and as some agenda item sometime, perhaps.
And if we're going to try to make an edit on Transportation 2040, doesn't that have to go before the NPO? How does this all fit together?
Well, I think the regulation would be something that the city would need to adopt an ordinance that repealed or whatever the 109.1, the STO, Kansas State statute on that issue. So I don't think it would necessarily be a transportation planning update, but as far as to be able to use the skateboards on the street legally, then it would need to be something that the city commission would ultimately need to pass an ordinance.
Okay.
So, but what we'll do is initiate this with our multimodal staff team, get some input, and come back with a report or some more information for this group.
Great.
Okay. Skateboards, are they allowed on sidewalks other than downtown? Is that
I believe so, yes.
only, I imagine it's probably pretty hard to use skateboards.
Non-motorized.
Yes.
That raises the question, when you talk about non-motorized vehicles on the shared use paths, because now there are e-bikes, which are motor assist, they're still pedaled, but I don't know where that would fall in, because there are a lot of riders now that have those. So are those banned from if we're going to be looking at all of this? I think that needs to
Yeah,
be-
we had a discussion about that last year, and there's some limitation on the amount of power for those electric assist bikes, and I don't have that information, but I think it would be good if we probably brought a summary of the different types of motorized assisted vehicles. I mean, you think like in other cities, they're dealing with bird scooters, which are essentially like the skateboards, but they have the handlebars, so I think maybe we can look at the different types of vehicles and motorized vehicles and come back and say what the different regulations are. So,
Sounds good. Interesting.
I just
Things will
want a demo.
change, huh? Okay, if we're all ready to move on to item number 3, the Transportation Commission composition. Dave or Chuck?
Yep, I'll go ahead and take this one. I don't have a big fancy formal presentation, I just thought we'd have a discussion. We've kind of been charged with asking the boards and commissions that we represent, staff representation on, to kind of ask maybe the boards to do some self-evaluation, some internal looking inside the board. Basically, is the composition of the board correct? I mean, is the size too big, too small? Do we have the right members appointed to the boards? For this board in particular, we've got a specific designation for KU, a specific designation for the USD. We have more than one university. We have more than one school district represented within the city of Lawrence. When the commission was adopted, and I think Charlie was the one who asked, but David sent out the link to the pedestrian advisory recommendations, their recommendations. And what we were seeing was, before we had groups that were just people that walk, pedestrian groups, we had bicycle groups, we had neighborhood groups, we had people interested in traffic calming. We had all these groups, and everybody were advocates for their own specific needs. And then one of the recommendations from the task force was that we needed to have a overall group overseeing all this, to where, staff really struggled a lot when, the pedestrians wanted specific things and the bicyclists wanted specific things, and, we always had these, we were at odds with each other, and we wanted an oversight group that would take all modes of transportation and make the best recommendation for the city, not just with respect to, walking or biking or cars or e-boards or whatever. So this group was formed, and I think originally when it was formed, we wanted to get all those broad opinions together. In fact, the Bicycle Advisory Commission ended up going as a subgroup of the MPO. So they weren't an advisory board back to the city commission anymore. So we wanted to make sure they were represented. And at that time, the health department was very active in the Lawrence Loop and other initiatives for walking and walkability, for healthy, for your health. We also have, the ADA community that's out there. So just some of the questions we'd like to hear the discussion. We'd like to take that back to the commission at some point. If you guys can come up with maybe some thoughts and recommendations. Maybe the group's perfect. Maybe this is exactly what the city needs, but I think the commission needs to hear, you've been doing this for a couple years now. I think a couple of things. We do have some discrepancy between our resolution and our bylaws, in that with the KU representative, I think, is it our bylaws that say it should be a student? Resolution. Obviously, we're not operating that way, so we do need to get that resolved. They should be the same. So anyway, just a general discussion, we can facilitate that. I think we touched a little bit on this at the retreat. I think Steve's got some thoughts as well, but we'd like to hear from everybody and maybe come up with some guidance that we can pass on to the city commission.
Okay.
That get the conversation started?
Anybody want to jump in? Carol?
I'll jump in. I remember specifically, Chuck, when you were talking about how you had the different groups coming at you and you didn't know which way to go. And then on the task force, of which I was a member, our big concern was that the PEDs and the bikes would get overlooked because it was such a new concept for the community. We are a vehicle-driven community, and other forms of transportation, it's a whole new ballgame. However, now, as I look at it, I'm thinking, why a KU student and not a Haskell student? Why the health department? I mean, we have great representatives from the health department, but is that necessary? And if we have someone from the business community, does that mean we should have someone from the neighborhood associations? And I think maybe our representation has gotten too specific. I think maybe we need to have more at large. That's just a thought. I didn't think anything beyond that.
Well, thanks for sharing out the task force report. Aaron, Carol, and I were all on that task force, and this issue of fragmentation of kind of interest group, kind of petitioning or lobbying of the city commission didn't seem like it was serving the interests of the city commission and the community, and it was very difficult for staff, I think, to kind of stay on top of it. So we understood that and put in our findings on the report that that approach is not working, and then in the recommendations advised to consolidate and form a new transportation commission that would take a holistic approach. And it was in our meetings one-on-one with each city commissioner, we asked the question, what makes for an effective advisory committee, and what would you want to do with the current approach? Mayor, at the time, Mayor Mike Amick said he's the one that proposed this notion of a transportation commission. He said that decisions that are made they're weightier than maybe we've currently done with our the old approach, and his advice was perhaps he just sort of threw it out there, like perhaps it should be on a higher level similar to the planning commission. He even went as far as suggesting that maybe it needs to have a supermajority of the city commission to override a decision of the transportation commission. He suggested that it probably should require a minimum amount of hours of work every month, such as maybe 8 hours was just what he threw out. And out of all the commissioners that provided us feedback, his was probably the most far-reaching, and it did influence a lot of our thinking about the need to come up with a wholly different approach. And then across the nation, we looked at other advisory board structures, and Davis, California had made the decision to go away from a PED bike advisory committee to a more holistic transportation advisory board, a multimodal transportation advisory board. And that seemed like, as Steve's been out to Davis, I have in-laws that live there. It's one of the if there's a community to look to in our country around bicycle infrastructure, it's one of the top on your list. So we figured if they're going there, and they've kind of gone past the PED bike task force or PED bike advisory committee, to recognize that it isn't just an interest group advisory committee, then maybe we ought to pay attention to the most forward-looking communities. And so propose this idea, like, let's consolidate. We identified 9 different advisory committees that in some way touch on ped bike issues. And it seemed like it was time for a different approach. We did not get into the details of how to do that, so we didn't say have representation from all these interest groups. In fact, what we called out was the need to consider the ability to think through a broader lens that considers everyone's needs and knows how to balance conflicting user groups to provide the best recommendation to the city commission, to staff, and essentially better serve the whole public. So when it did come to the actual resolution to form us, it felt to me, I don't know how it felt to the other 2 that were on that task force, that this very specific appointment of people with a certain interest, that didn't seem to quite align with what I understood as our intention. So I think there's maybe some value to going back to that. That's why I asked for this to be shared out, was that notion that, Aaron's at this table representing, I think it's bike interests. Carol, I'm not sure your specific representation. John's got this, business interest representation, but John has a lot of expertise that we've heard, from his years on Traffic Safety Commission. So it feels like we don't fit into a box, and we ought to have a broader understanding of the transportation matters we address and balance all of that. So I think, from the health department's perspective, our interest is really about promoting health in the community. It's not being represented on a commission. It's that we know that transportation has a huge impact on people's lives. Whether that's access to affordable transportation to get to services that are essential to your health, or being able to, get through town on an e-bike. I mean, people have to have choices to be able to sustain their livelihoods, which is critical to their health. So I know our health director, I consulted him before coming tonight just to make sure I represented us appropriately. And our position is that we don't really have a stake in being on the commission. We have an interest and we share this with the community, that we want to promote health in all policies, all community decision-making. So however that gets advanced, we're supportive of that.
Well, go ahead, Aaron.
So I wanted to throw some other things out there that kind of came up with or my concerns with the bicycle pedestrian issues task force, and that was these things came up where I think it's Davis and Boulder both have transportation commissions, and my concern at that time was that both those cities, as far as multimodal transportation, are in a drastically different place. It's much more part of the culture. It's much more accepted. And so my concern was with getting rid of the Bicycle Advisory Committee, that we would lose something because we are not in the same place. I mean, we don't have 200 bikes all together at one spot on the sidewalk every Saturday morning that there's a farmer's market or more. It's not that comparable. And so I think that was something I was worried about. And so in some ways, I completely agree that there doesn't need to be this person represents this or this person represents that. But I don't think you can take that out completely. So I don't know exactly what you do with that, but I think we're not at the same place. So if you're going to have a transportation commission that works to really think about some of those things, it is really critical to have people on the commission that bike, that walk regularly, preferably for transportation. I mean, even we were talking about a KU student, and it would be nice to have some of the perspectives of what KU students want to do, or people that age, even if they're Haskell students, what is it that, but I mean, it's hard. You have one person that represents an entire school or one person that represents 2 schools. So I don't really know, I don't have a solution. I only have the concerns, and I think a lot of the concerns I had when the pedestrian bicycle issues task force was going on are still there. I don't think we're in a better place as far as representing or changing. I don't want to say changing the culture of Lawrence, because I've always been like, I use the transportation you want to use, but I've also always felt like you have this issue here where the task force showed the existing conditions, only 10% of people felt comfortable riding a bike for, daily activities. So if you have 90% of people that are uncomfortable with it, they're not going to do it until they feel comfortable. And we even had, statistics on that? It was 54% of people said they would if they had adequate facility types or infrastructure. So I think that's what I keep going back to. So I don't really have a solution, but I do feel like we don't want to lose that in Lawrence. We don't want everybody on the Transportation Commission to be someone that's never been on a bike before or has no desire to be, because then we're losing that multimodal goal that we have.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Nick.
So, I'm glad you asked to maybe find a solution, because I've been kind of cogitating on it for a while, and it seems to me that what we went over at the retreat is that a lot of us are not in one box, like you were saying, right? I mean, for example, I'm here representing the Public Transit Advisory Committee, but I've now started biking to work, and I walk to City Hall in downtown all the time, but I'm also an engineer, so I'm a lot of different things. And I'm sure most of us fit into at least a couple of categories. Because of that, what I was thinking, perhaps in a manner similar to how the strategic plan is developed with the 7, I already forget the buzzwords, the
Critical
7
success
boxes.
factors.
Critical success factors, yeah. So, they have those priority initiatives that are essentially the flagship projects that best represent a critical success factor. But every other project, if you ever look in detail what the City Commission meeting agenda looks like, almost every agenda item has a little footnote that'll say, like, here's the strategic plan things that this has to do with. So it might be like, this has to do with critical or successful government and sustainability and all that jazz. It might have 4 different things under it that it applies to. I think this commission and probably others could be similar. What I propose, therefore, and this is just throwing it out there, is that we could basically develop a list of stakeholders, demographics, and interest groups that should be or could be represented on such a board. It might be a long list. It might be significantly more than 9. It might be up to 30, depending on how you slice them. And then do a quick survey of ourselves so far. See how many of the boxes we check and see which ones are glaringly missing. It's possible that a lot of us are drivers. It's possible a lot of us are walkers, but it's possible very few bike. Or, for example, it's possible that we all live in one part of town. That's not a really good representation. Or that perhaps we're all in the same income bracket or something like that. So that there are various ways that you could represent a community based on a lot of different lines. So, I mean, if that is of interest, we could even take a step at some point soon and, somebody could just draft up a potential list of these stakeholder groups and, send it to everybody and see who do you identify with and who are we really missing? I mean, right off the bat, I would say we're missing youth. We have nobody of youth. I think I'm the youngest on the board, and I'm over 30. I mean, I've been driving for over a decade, so that's not great. So there are certain demographic groups that are probably not represented as well. They often are in the public comments, which is a good start. But in terms of having a seat at the table, as it were, I don't know, just for future composition issues, perhaps.
Well, I've landed on something kind of similar to that. And I put together a sheet of comments and gave a copy to Chuck and Dave. I'm sure it can be available for everyone, but just kind of going over the points in my own mind. I think we could be 9. I think we could also be fewer. I actually think 7 seems like a good number to me. It would be more efficient. We do have on this group, and Nick pointed it out, some overlapping interests. And, with 9 people, not everybody gets a chance to comment, or perhaps people that have a little bit more to say will have less of an opportunity to comment. So I actually think, 7 kind of is a gut feel for me, but I'm not really, to me, the number isn't as big a deal as who and what they bring to the table. I actually think more of a bottom-up approach to selecting commissioners might work, similar to what you're saying, but the at-large approach, I think makes a whole lot of sense to me. It's almost too easy to have a box of interest groups, of organizations, and, okay, we got that one checked off, let's go get the next one. And it's taken us 2.5 years to get to the point where we are now, which I think is being very effective. I think that may have happened quicker had we looked at, the skill set, the background, the interests of the people that became part of a group like this. And what I'm suggesting would be not make a list of the boxes of all the 30 or 50 or 200 groups in town, but make more a general list of interest areas and background in more of a generic manner. And I think looking at who we are now and what that may look like with this group, creating a matrix of all kinds of criteria and seeing what we're needing might make some sense. I'm thinking that, and I don't know how this process works with staff, and I know the mayor makes the appointments, so, how all that blends together, I really don't know. But if I'm looking at just a clean piece of paper, and I'm looking at, a bunch of things that would be good for people to bring to the table, I would go look for the people that would bring those things to the table, not necessarily somebody that worked for a school district or worked for the health department or whatever, and build it up that way. I think at the end of the day, you could end up with a body of people that would be, diverse in terms of their background and their interest and their knowledge, and maybe be more effective and more efficient at the same time. Let's see. In considering new appointments, the gaps that are either current now, or will be once people leave their term, should be addressed, and not, okay, it's somebody that was part of a group that we have. The last thing, there's a few other things here I think I'd be repeating what others have said, but I also wonder if Transportation Commission is the right name for this group. When I see Transportation Commission, I'm thinking, gee, I-70 and Iowa Street, and maybe that's just my own biases, but I think we're more than a Transportation Commission in the context of active transportation and multimodal issues that we deal with. Is there a better name for this group than Transportation Commission?
I know that was brought up at least a couple of times during the Pedestrian Bicycle Issues Task Force, how about
Yeah.
Multimodal Transportation Commission, something
Yeah.
like this?
Yeah.
And it just didn't seem to go anywhere. So I'm
Okay.
not sure if that would still be the case, but
Well, maybe it's back on the table now. Well,
Maybe we should try that name again. We had a saying at Haskell, you can chew like a beaver or soar like an eagle. So we talked about what kind of detail we could do. What would happen if we did something like a name change, or if we beefed up our bylaws and our purpose so that all the modes of transportation are kind of hammered out? So that when the chair looks at it, they say, oh, well, we've got to do this, and it's right up front.
And I think that's, if you do something like that, the name change, I thought if you have already as your commission's name, Multimodal Transportation Commission, then it already frames it in a way that people are going to want to come from different areas, I think. That they're recognizing, say, if you're a bicyclist, you're being represented just because of the name, so.
And I think I can add a little clarity. What I was trying to say was not wanting to kick anybody out or any representative off because they may represent the health department or the school district or whatever. And what would happen would be, you know, those interests would be part of a list. So they're really not going away. You know, we would be looking for someone with a background in community health as an attribute that would be really an important attribute to have. And a few people have mentioned students, you know, more active users of all this stuff in the community that would bring things to the table like we had in the public comment. Would make a whole lot of sense to me. Anybody else want to chime in? Catherine?
No, I think these are all really good
Yeah.
points, and I really like this idea of sort of having this list of attributes, and then as we look at people to replace people that fall off the board, to just look and see that they have several of those attributes. But yeah, I don't like the idea of, you know, being the bicycle representative, or, you know, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because I think we all have multiple interests.
John and Ron, anything?
I would agree. I think if you could develop that list of attributes, I think we're going to be surprised that there's an awful lot of them that are already covered. I've never felt, since we started, that I look at Charlie as only representing the health department. I don't look at it like that. And I don't think that's been the case for anybody. I think they've represented a broad spectrum of ideas. I'm not hung up on the number either. I mean, 7, 9, 12, I don't know that that's critical. I do think that I do think we cover a lot of those areas, but I do think it would be good to maybe get them on paper and see, you know, over the next several months.
I think you could almost let the list evolve into telling you how many people you need. Really, you know, if you look at all these things and you can cover them with 5 people, great. If it's 7, great, maybe it's 9 or 11, you know, but I think maybe the first thing I said, I think I have a gut feel about 7, but I don't really care. You know, I think,
The airport advisory board actually says 5 to 7 members. And right now, we're running with 7, but it can be 5, so
yeah,
there might be an option, 7 or
Right.
9 members.
right. Ron, what do you think?
I don't really have anything to add really to what's been said, I don't think. You know, I know I'm on here as the USD 497 representative, and, I mean, that's not my, you know, I don't blinder myself in that manner. I know a lot of it, when I first came on and when this first started, was because there was a lot of traffic. You know, right before this all happened, there was a lot of traffic issues being corrected around some of our school districts, and we were trying to up our communication between the city and the school district, and so I kind of fell into that, so that's kind of how that evolved for me. So, I mean, I can see, I guess if you were just to ask me, do I need to be on here in order for us, do I feel like I have to be on this commission in order for us to be able to keep traffic flow and safety around our schools? No, I don't think so. It's not but I also understand, you know, I'm also representing the interests of every kid and family that walks and bikes to school, or wants to walk or bike to school, or to take the bus. You know, the safe routes to schools, I'm very involved with that part of it, and that's obviously a pretty, it's very forward in our rubric for how we choose some of the projects that we do. So, I think I like the idea of having student participation. I think we may be limited by what age can be on a commission itself, and then more importantly, if we're talking about 3-year terms, you know, unless there was a way to make an exception or to have a revolving, you know, we're going to have a student representative and maybe a different person each, you know, I know that those are some things that would need to be considered for that, I would think.
Yeah. Great, appreciate it. I think we need to go to the public on this next. Should we do that and then bring it back?
Yeah.
Okay. Public comment?
Hi, my name is Michael Allman. Gary Weber said I wasn't going to speak tonight, but April Fools. I like a lot of what I'm hearing, particularly focusing on multimodal transportation. You know, when this whole effort started some years ago, the advocates, the multimodal advocates, pointed out that way too much of the city attention, focus, and budget goes to motor vehicles. What about the rest of us? And that's how this evolved. So I think that really is more of your focus. I would like to see multimodal as part of the name, but also to emphasize the focus of what you do. And as far as how to select members, Nick Kuzmiak made some good points about stakeholders, demographics, interest areas as screens. And I think maybe you want to look at 2 levels of screens. You know, a primary level like what Aaron Payton mentioned. And let me step back and say, when I talked with Paul Wojciechowski, I think I pronounced his name, the designer of the bicycle boulevards, he said, you're really not going to get a very good design of a facility for bicycles by somebody who's never been on a bicycle. And so what Aaron is saying is that that should be a primary screen, not necessarily bicycle, but some sort of wheeled device. It's very different than walking. I mean, we tend to lump pedestrian bicycle together, but on a bicycle or a skateboard or a motorized scooter, any of those, there's a difference of speed, of balance, of navigability. Is that the right word?
Yep.
You know, stopping distance, those kind of things which aren't addressed when you're on foot. You stop like that, generally speaking. So that, I think, should be a primary screen. Another primary screen could be a skill set. You know, whether somebody's an engineer, whether they're an educator, whether they're an architect, something like that. I don't know. I'm just kind of putting ideas out that you might consider a 2-layer skill set, and the second layer might be age or agencies, you know, that aren't as critical as that first level of skill sets, or, you know, screens, rather. So that's my 2 cents worth, and I thank you for the time.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Anyone else?
I think I would just like to say that I think the student idea and getting more youth in the eyes of the commission would be a great opportunity. I think that obviously with having, I think it's 18,000 KU students or around there, over 20,000, that you have this very large demographic in the city of Lawrence that isn't represented. And I think there was a great point brought up by Mr. May. He was talking about how obviously you'd have to figure out the terms, because I believe he said it's a 3-year term, and obviously for students you have a vast majority of students that aren't actually from Lawrence or don't stay here year-round or things of that sort. So either you would have to have a very committed active member who's willing to travel all the time to attend these things to make it year-round, or you'd have to have shorter terms, or maybe selecting somebody for different periods or whatever it may be. But I think that's very important to get some different demographic, different perspective, but also being able to accommodate the different demographic as they are going to have, such as like youth. It's going to be a very different situation in terms of how their lifestyle evolves and how that goes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty, back up here. Anything more to add to the conversation?
So I think based on what we've heard tonight, with the commission's approval, maybe David and I can work with Steve, try and formulate maybe a letter back to the commission on, you know, the makeup and some of the thoughts. I hesitate to start saying, and just to use Michael's thing, first tier, second tier, this is what we're going to look. That's really the mayor's prerogative. you know, you guys all probably submitted applications, you told them what you were interested in, and he or she, the mayor, goes through that and makes that determination to set out criteria. This is, you know, we want somebody from agencies or walkers, or that's really for the mayor to make that determination. But I think laying out the set of traits and the interests, you know, we want to see people that are interested in this, because if you're not interested, you're not going to come to the meeting, and you're not going to be effective commissioner anyway. So I guess that's where I'm at. If that works for the commission, we will do that, and then we'll bring it back to the next meeting, and you guys can either change it, or we can discuss it more, or you can act on it, and we can get it up to the commission then.
Okay.
I was thinking of one other thing. As we discuss specific issues, when they come before this commission, there may be some interest that isn't represented on our commission, and I think we should maybe make an effort to bring in a spokesman, like when we were talking about the tunnel at 19th and Iowa. It might have been a good idea to bring in some KU students who might have an interest in that, and, you know, or invite them to speak, just to make sure that we're hearing from the groups most impacted by any given project. So, since we're not going to be able to have every single interest in this group, so.
I was going to say regarding that, I looked at that, and another thing to consider, though, is although we're thinking about KU students, there is an entire southwest side of town where kids go to Lawrence High School that will now have an underpass. And I can think of many neighbors in my neighborhood that are like, I'm not letting my kid cross, you know, to get there. And I mean, that was something I considered, that it doesn't just include KU students, it includes a whole group of young people on the other side of town, that Iowa's the Great Wall. I have just what I wrote down that I felt like was connected. The things that might sort of affect that composition of membership is a name change, just to make it more clear. Keep same number, or 7 to 9, a variable number, and list of attributes. And then I just put, I don't know if this, we could think about something like this, but I thought in the bylaws, I haven't read the bylaws in a while, so I tend to forget things after about a couple weeks, but like, anyone who recognizes the inherent right to pick modes and a desire to pick modes of travel and a desire to, you know, contribute to considering that or something.
I was just going to add, in some instances, I know that advisory boards do make suggestions regarding their membership. So we might consider doing something like that as the year gets closer to the time when we're recognizing the transition of members. I don't know how we would do that exactly, if we want to be as specific as saying, here's someone we'd like to see added, or we could just do some kind of evaluation as to what perspectives we think are missing, and provide some direction to the mayor as to what we'd like to see, what we think would be complementary to the current, what we're expecting in the future. Like, we know we're going to lose these perspectives, maybe we don't have this perspective, so here's kind of the set of considerations we'd ask for them to take as they're appointing someone.
Yeah, I think that would work. For me, I still think, starting at the bottom and looking at the attributes you're needing, you know, to complement the group. And, oh, by the way, I know somebody, you know, that would have the desire and be good at it. And just, you know.
I think, again, I think that, you know, that's the mayor's prerogative.
Sure.
I think the mayor will probably discuss, maybe with the chair of the group. I don't know that's done on every occasion, maybe more so in the past than present and ongoing. But I don't know that there's any reason why you can't encourage people to apply. You know, if you know somebody that you think would be a great person on the board, they could sure apply. And, you know, hopefully the mayor would reach out to the board commission, or board chair, and see what they thought.
Okay. Well, that works for me, so we'll put together some thoughts and
Okay.
let everybody have a look at it next month.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Moving on to item 4, staff items. Update on non-motorized prioritization policy and the Lawrence Bikeway Plan.
Yeah, so I wanted to give the commission an update on where we're at with the plans and that non-motorized policy. So I'm going to kind of read through this, and at the end, let me know if there's any questions, but just kind of give an outline on where we're at with the status of these. So the Transportation Commission and staff has identified the need to update the non-motorized prioritization policy that is being used to implement the bike ped projects, and we have a scoring system to start the discussion on how to prioritize those projects. So right now, we are working on revising the bikeway plan. And so that bikeway plan consolidates some of the previous plans and studies that were done that include the pedestrian bike issues task force, priority network, the Lawrence Loop alignment study, Lawrence bike parking and amenities policy review, and with citywide and downtown recommendations, annual bike ped counts, bike friendly community feedback, and the existing countywide bikeway system plan. And so right now, we are getting additional data, traffic counts, and speed data to help finish that plan. The draft of the plan, we expect to bring that to the draft to the commission, I think in May, to Transportation Commission for preliminary comments. And then have a public comment period with consideration for approvals to begin in July for the plan. And we will need to, staff feels it's going to be important to finish that plan before we look at revising the non-motorized prioritization policy and the scoring that goes behind that. There's some anticipated changes to the bikeway demand model, the priority network. There's a new secondary bikeway network that will impact the model. Some routes may be new and be added to the list, and may be removed. And so that I think that getting that approved first will be one of our priorities, and then looking at the bikeway plan, and then looking at the non-motorized prioritization policy afterwards. And as far as the timing and the budget goes for the budgeted funds for bike ped projects, we have, I think, $400,000 in 2019 that still needs to be allocated to projects. We would like to be able to review and make some recommendations on using the existing policy to make those recommendations on projects to use that money so that we can keep making progress and design and get some of that work underway. And then we would wait till we had revised the prioritization policy before budgeting or before deciding recommendations on 2020 projects. And so we would, looking at the timeline as far as getting these things reviewed, it would probably be late summer, early fall before we began that review and making recommendations for the 2020 dollars. So I know there's a lot of interest in how we're going to spend the money and how we're going to split it up. And so we do feel like the first step is to finish the bikeway plan, then look at the prioritization policy, and then make recommendations on the 2020 dollars. So that The 2019 budget, just for a reminder, I think it was $600,000. We allocated $200,000 of that a couple meetings ago to finish the sidewalk gap and ramp project and safe route to school project from last year to make up for the additional cost of that project after we bid it. And so that left us with 400,000 to be prioritized this year. So,
You didn't
lot
say
of
that right.
lot of things going on, plans and policies,
Easy
and
for you to say.
and so we wanted to give everyone an update on that. And then when we get to the calendar here in a couple of items after the commission items, we can kind of go over how those will lay out, and we kind of try to start plugging some of those different topics into different meetings and study sessions, so.
Great. Questions? Well, I have trouble saying non-motorized prioritization policy, so I think that needs a name change or something.
Like multimodal,
Yeah.
Multimodal, non-motorized.
well, we have electric scooters or skateboards.
Anybody have anything before we go to public? Okay. Public comment?
Public comment on what?
An update about the non-motorized
the
transportation.
Topic we just discussed. Having none, we'll move on to,
Wait.
They schooled us twice.
Am I under the wire?
go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Chair Evans. Michael Allman again. Initially, I have a question, I guess, of staff. For 2019, still using the, as it's called now, the non-motorized prioritization policy to identify whatever projects are funded. After the bikeway plan is adopted for 2020, I assume that prioritization policy will still be part of the the package. Is that right? That, the bikeway plan will then help you plug in whatever projects will go into that matrix.
Correct. And there may be, we're using that network as a starting point for the different gaps or potential projects, bikeway projects. And so there's maybe some that were on the list that may come off the list, and some may be added
Yeah,
to the list. And
yeah, but the bikeway plan will inform the process better.
yes,
Yeah, okay.
absolutely.
Okay, then a distinct question about that then. As I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, when the prioritization policy came in question a few months back, that it didn't seem to be working in all cases, or some of the criteria were lacking, or, anyway, I brought up some comments, I know. I thought that the policy itself and the criteria and how it was structured was going to be investigated and revisited and possibly changed. Is that true?
That will be up for discussion as well.
That will be, okay.
Yes.
And do you know when?
This summer.
Okay.
So we're gonna start talking about
After we
it.
select this year's projects,
The 2019 projects?
or maybe not, before we select them?
Well, we're planning on making recommendations on the 2019 projects under the existing
Right.
policy.
Okay. Okay, well, I just want to know when that might happen, so,
Can I help?
great.
Michael, on the agenda, the last page on the calendar, it's right now, this is all tentative, but the regular meeting on June 3rd, is when we would consider recommendations on the 2019 bike ped projects.
Okay, June.
And then the July 1 meeting, so we'll have a study session on the non-motorized project prioritization. And August 5th is when we would consider recommendation of approval of a non-motorized project prioritization.
Okay.
I took that as
I
like,
didn't know that.
first we're going to finish the 2019, and then we'll start to study the revision to the policy, and then we'll have a decision on that
Great. Okay, thank
in
you.
August.
Any other public comment? Okay. Moving on to commission items. This is fair game for anything, remember?
I've got a list.
Okay.
Charlie, when it's over, see if you can guess which position I'm supposed to be representing.
Okay.
My first one I just added, it's time for us to step into the transportation planning process. And when there are projects that are going to happen, like this transportation hub, now I doubt very much that we're going to change anything. We don't anticipate changing anything, but I think it should be brought to us. We need to change our line of sight. We need to be the fielding agent for the city commission. If there are any people who want to speak in support of the project, let's invite them to come here. Let's do a dry run of that transportation hub here. And let's see what, I have no idea. We've got to start getting into the process is what I'm saying. And I think that's a good place to start. That's my first comment.
Can I make a comment on your
Sure.
first one? I think over the years, correct me if I'm wrong, we had, Bob Nugent's been here several times, and I'm not sure we were really asked for our opinion, but we were at least informed about some of the considerations along the way. And that's not saying we've accomplished what you're suggesting.
No, I'm
but-
suggesting we make recommendations.
Yeah, I think maybe a better example than the transit hub, since it's so far along, would be projects like the 23rd and Naismith project, and also the development in North Lawrence. You know, as, you know, things that obviously have all kinds of multimodal considerations.
Right. And there's
that-
another one on 23rd Street as
Yeah,
well.
the 23rd and Naismith. So that would be my comment to your comment.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
My next one is on shared youth paths. I see a lot of that term battered around, and I'm here to tell you, pedestrians do not invite other forms of transportation to share a path. It's usually the other way around, and I didn't think much of it, and then when my elderly neighbor said that she was walking in our neighborhood and she was startled by a cyclist who was going through on the bike path route. Because a cyclist was going at a fairly rapid speed, we don't have sidewalks in our neighborhood. I've had similar situations. The jingling bell does nothing for me other than jingle my nerves. It's something that somebody thought up. It doesn't work for a pedestrian who is a genuine pedestrian. So when we talk about these things, we need to learn to separate in our minds the difference between recreation and walking for transportation, because they are not the same thing. And that's all I have to say on that. The next one is, I think we have a convolution of ordinances and city practices involving some of our modes of transportation, like cyclists riding on 23rd Street sidewalks. That's the one that comes to my mind. Where does the pedestrian go? I mean, the sidewalks are about this wide. When is it okay for a bike to be on a sidewalk? We have never really said anything because we're afraid to, because we have so many occasions where it's not safe for a cyclist and they resort to the sidewalk. Right outside City Hall is one of those places. we don't have any rules because we don't know what the rules should be. And then I got to thinking more generally. Drivers have opinions on what cyclists and pedestrians should be doing. Cyclists have opinions on what drivers and pedestrians should be. It's a three-way thing. It's a 360. We need to get it all worked out if we're going to be multimodal. Some of it is courtesies, long forgotten. Some of it are city ordinances that we no longer enforce. Some might be things that we need to sort out and make as recommendations to a pedestrian. We need to start going through them and sorting them out. That one's off my list. Okay, now I've got to do the obvious. I was downtown and I noticed that the corner, I think by the courthouse maybe, there was a transformer and 3 newspaper boxes obstructing the view of pedestrians from the drivers. Those are just obvious things that we need to be taking care of. And transformers on a pole, they create visibility problems. We need to think about that a little bit better. My husband and I were coming back after the Planning Commission meeting. And it was about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and we were driving past Checkers. And we were startled because we're not the speediest drivers in the world anymore. There were 2 pedestrians in the crosswalk, and we did not see them. And for the life of me, I could not figure out why we didn't see them. They were wearing light colors, they were doing all the right things, and they were standing there. There was quite a bit of traffic, and then I realized what it was. There were no lights. There was no street light near those pedestrians. So even if they were wearing light clothing, it didn't help. Pedestrian buttons should be reachable. Where was I just today? Oh, right out here in City Hall, the front door. If you walk up to the door, you have to be able to stand there to push the ADA button, or you roll back down the hill. You know, just stupid stuff that we continually do. We've got to think through that a little bit better. The 23rd Street project, we blocked off a quarter mile from pedestrians, from Checkers to Mass. And I'm thinking, what's a pedestrian supposed to do? Do we have an alternative route for them? Do we expect them to walk up a couple of blocks and down and across somehow? And we did a pretty good job. We got the high school students back and forth. That's great. But what are we doing? We need to think through that. I've seen cities where they do boardwalks around construction. That's not possible there. I don't know what's possible. We just need to think about those things. Okay, Charlie, who do I represent?
Carol Bowen.
I'm done.
Thank you. Those were all excellent. We appreciate it. Anybody else? Comments or additions to commission items? All righty. We can go on to the calendar.
All right. Maybe just going to the calendar would have been easier to explain than the memo. But the calendar outlines what we had in the memo, particularly in these next few months as far as seeing study sessions and regular meetings, the bike, I guess next month we got the Bike PED Issues Task Force report on the study session, and recommendation on 13th Street and 21st Street Bike Boulevard concept is slated for the regular meeting. Online, we're still have it open to receive comments on both of those 13th and 21st Street Bike Boulevard projects. So we had a meeting last week at Lawrence High School, another meeting on the final concept plans, and we'll be finishing up the concept plans and bringing that to you next month. And then staff has begun to meet and discuss how we're going to approach the neighborhood traffic management program for 2019, and so we have that on the agenda for May the 6th. And then looking out to the next few months after that, we've plugged in some of the topics, as we discussed earlier. The recommendation on the 2019 bike ped projects is in June. Non-motorized project prioritization study session in July, and then receiving that recommendation in August. And then the Lawrence Bikeway Plan study session in June, approval, or recommended approval in July. So some of those items, we're planning on having study session to kind of go over them a month prior to receiving your recommendation on those. So we started to plug in some of these here on the calendar just to give everyone a heads up on when they're coming in the schedule, and obviously things are subject to change based off priorities and projects that come up, but we'll certainly probably be adding some things to this as well here in the next few months, but just wanted to start getting some of those out there on the calendar. So let me know if there's any questions on any of those.
I do have a question, maybe a comment on the Bike Boulevard concept plan. How are you going to present that? And I asked that.
You can take a tour.
Well, actually, I was thinking about putting the boards up and maybe gathering around the boards. I mean, I walked through Lawrence High last week, and there's a lot of detail on those. And I don't know that I have a solution, but I'm not sure that projecting up here is going to work that well for people to really see what's going on.
Well, that's a good thought. We do anticipate making a formal presentation and kind of walking through each of the corridors to show what we're making recommendations are for, the treatments and the locations. If we have the boards, it might not be a bad idea to have them set up to look at before the meeting.
Yeah, that would be good.
We could probably set them up out in the lobby. We had those at the meeting last week, and was kind of helpful for the public that was particularly interested in one location or treatment to be able to look at it more in detail. All of those are online now, so you can kind of scroll through them and get an idea on the concepts that we're looking at. But that's our thought would be we're just going to kind of walk through that and make our recommendation for the project. And I've asked the team to look at the budget as well, make sure that we're kind of in tune with our budget too for the project.
Amanda kind of ran me through those slides today, and I haven't seen it on the boards, but for the directionally challenged person that I am, that sometimes I struggle looking, it was in nice bite-sized pieces that I was able to put it together pretty easily. But I agree, looking at it from a distance, unless you have it right here in front of you, there's going to be some things that would be difficult to digest.
Well, the same would be true for the public. You know, if it's going to be a meaningful discussion, need to be able to see what we're talking about, so. Okay. Any other calendar items, questions? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Ron and seconded by Catherine. All those in favor, aye.
You know, one way to get around having the students